Welcome everyone to the multi-networking community sync meeting. Today is March 8th. Today in the agenda, I want to touch on two things.
You became muted for me when you did the screen share. I think it does that.
Please do it. Am I still muted? Yeah.
I hear you now.
Oh, you can hear me. Okay, yeah. I always do this.
I think when you do the screen share, maybe you just have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. I know. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So first thing is by recommendation from Michael. I created a roadmap, and this is based on what we discussed in our previous CAP discussion. So I want to go over that and then continue our discussion on the API. We stopped on one of the fields. Any other points to discuss? Please add your item here if you want to talk about something quickly. I assume the API discussion is something that will take the rest of the meeting. So if you want to add something, just add before that bullet point. All right. Let me just try again, share the other, the presentation that I had, the roadmap. Don't share audio. Okay, now I assume you can still hear me. So I created this deck just to kind of put in one place the current kind of phasing and more or less when I think we can do it. And bear with me on this one because I am completely inexperienced in terms of how stiff stuff can be developed in Kubernetes. So this is some very rough estimation of me thinking of what it can take and what it can really be. So some main pointers, something for you to review, probably offline, but this is just a phasing that we defined in the requirements cap. So this is a copy paste. There's nothing new here. This is based on what exactly the link is here. So basically, just to kind of reiterate, phase one is the basic API definition and how we can reference this in the pod spec. So and just basically stopping at that. Phase two is making the pod network selectively available across the cluster, which will then be engaging pod scheduler and how we can kind of enable that. And the next thing would be kubelet and API probing. So this has to do with today's basic functionality of every pod which is being probed by kubelet. And the APIs as well, so accessibility for those to the additional multi-network interfaces in the network, in the pod. The phase three is about extending multi-network to other features like services and network policies, so enabling those things to pods. And last phase is some additional extended features like namespace profiles for pod networks, so that I don't have to specify explicitly on the pod spec, then ability for hot pluggability for the interfaces themselves and the IPs. So that's something that the phases that we establish in the requirements. If you have some other comments on this, please go to the cap and comment over there. Yes, Per.
I'm talking while I'm muted.
Can't hear you.
I'm looking at the schedule. We need to become very focused because we basically have a drop every second meeting. And,
and now okay, let's go through that. Okay, now you're commenting on this. So and bear with me. Those are some sort of milestones that I think that I hope we can achieve. But going on, and I have 2 years kind of draw out, but I'm not sure whether how much accurate they are. I assume this is very aggressive. At least I think it's maybe very aggressive.
So, but it means that we need to work on, in reality, phase 1 and phase 2 in parallel, probably. I mean, to start with
And this
phase
is
2
something
after.
that, yeah, so this is something that I want to kind of call out. I'm not sure whether that's possible or not. That's my wishing. But whether that's possible, and this is what I think per what you call is, as we are defining the phases, because right now what I'm considering there is definition of the cap in terms of, like, I'm considering this like a designing phase of specific caps. And as I'm assuming this is a track of designing, and this meeting is for that part. As we finish that, we can kick off the next designing phase. But
Okay,
that
so-
would mean that in the same time, we perform implementation of that cap in
So-
parallel, right? So I wonder whether that's even possible.
So what I would suggest that you can from this pretty much already set agendas for the meetings. I mean, next meeting, we need to finish the requirements cap. After that, it needs to be merged, right? And then it's really phase 1 work that we need to break down. So I mean, all of us, and I mean, I'm really better than getting much done in between the meetings because I have too many other things to do. But I think we're going to be able to keep this sort of speed. Then we need to have, I mean, also project layout, sort of what do we discuss on the different meetings and what is expected before the meeting. Because otherwise you lost 2 weeks, right?
I think in terms of like the requirements cap merge, we have that established. I went through the first round of reviews. Right now, I think this week is busy because of like the release for the next release of Kubernetes. So there is a crunch time on that one. So I'm not bothering anyone about additional reviews. But next week, I'm going to start pinging folks to kind of get it merged, right? So I'm counting that by the end of the March, I should hopefully get that done. So I'm not concerned about the beginning of the year. In terms of what you're saying, I'm trying for us to establish the definition of the APIs by, let's say, July or so, right? Because this is June here. So basically July, August, I think this is what I would like to have us deciding on what the phase 1 will look like, what is the final scope. So right now, that's what I mentioned, is the definition of the APIs, which I think we are at least halfway there. And then definition of how that's going to behave, right? And publish that. You say that's very aggressive?
No, I just think that, well, it's aggressive because when it's in time, it seems so long, right? But if you start counting the number of meetings between different things, they're not that many, right? So it means that we need to be focused, and I think do some planning so we know what's expected. So that's
the other option.
Some of us, I mean, I'm include me, right? Need to become. I mean, you're working much more full time on this than I think anyone else, right? But there's others that needs to a little bit step up and contribute, and I'm one of them.
I would welcome. I am trying. Full time it's maybe overstatement, but I am definitely trying to get this pushed, and maybe, and that's something that at this point we can consider. Should we increase the frequency of this meeting? Because I think we are at the stage where we can get it more engaging.
Or do we have different type of meetings that we have sort of community meeting where we discuss this, and we have other meetings where we work on action items and so on, and discuss that and sort of drive the technology forward. I don't know.
I think right now there's not much, like, let's say, the maintenance of the project itself. There's not much. I don't think there's a lot of work around that one. I would consider the main thing of the meetings and discussions always will be around the API.
Yeah. I don't know. Andrew is not here today, right? But for a long time he was having the network policy meetings every Monday, and just the fact that it was every week, and sort of the focus became much clearer. There was not so much remembering what was there to do, and sort of, so we had, I would say, a much higher pace from that. So unfortunately, also the number of people that connected every week shrunk because of that. So that is the bad side, but the continuity is really much easier.
Any other voices around that? Because that's unexpected proposal. I didn't kind of came here that just kind of come and thank you, Per, for bringing that up. But any voice on that? Should we maybe increase the speed of this, Tomo?
Yep, I agree the Per comment. So I mean that the schedule is more than a little bit the aggressive if this meeting, I mean that we have the bi-weekly meeting.
Mhm.
So then maybe and then of course this is let me double check that this is just a stretch. The schedule, this is not the commit, and then no, actually we do not.
This is a sketch. That's a draft. That's correct, Tomo. This is my first kind of draft of this.
Yeah.
I just the main thing is that, and this is what I went through the whole I don't want to go through all of it, but the main kind of idea here is that I would assume as soon as we consider the designing phase for the first for the specific phase, we finish it, we kick off the next phase. And in the meantime, we do the implementation, because you can see I have a implementation availability defined as well. So that means we do the work as well in the meantime to do the implementation itself. So this is where I'm not sure whether that's possible. That's something that I don't know.
Is that kickoff at the plan to be at the KubeCon or in time with that, or is that just a coincidence?
No, I don't align this anywhere with KubeCon. I don't want to KubeCons for everyone's.
Okay, but it's a coincidence. That's what it is.
It is. If there's something, yeah. Probably some of this has to be aligned with maybe a specific Kubernetes releases, which I didn't done here at all. So there is that aspect. So probably this has to be better spread out and aligned with the Kubernetes releases, if possible. So I didn't do that here. So yeah. So Tomo, you had an idea.
Yeah, I still I want to continue and another things is about so this I feel that this schedule is it assumes that we do the kinds of the waterfall approach for each phase. I mean that design and then the finalized design and the implementations. But I'm a little bit wondering that this style is feasible or not, because these API is pretty new, and then maybe during the design discussions, we should testing this API. Maybe we should how do I say prototype or some stuff during the design, and then we should this stuff. So currently this, as far as I'm looking at this stuff, it seems to me like the design and conclude their design, and after that we start implementation. But maybe we should the kind of the overlapping over some of the stuff.
What I'm thinking is here, the implementation would start, I assume, after we publish the KEP, right? As we defined, okay, what more or less we can do. You have the time here, right? In between publish of the KEP and the implementation done, because this is availability, right? This is where I think it will be finished. So basically, I'm fine. Here you can see I have, what is it, like almost half a year to do some sort of implementation, because KEP emerging. So here, before the KEP merges, you can start doing stuff. You can start POCing, what you say, exactly experimenting. And then as you have a KEP merge, then when you have already some of the code, you adjust it to the KEP being merged, and then you finalize it so that you can merge it for the implementation. Peter, I think Peter.
Yeah, so I was really just going to say something very similar to what Tomo said. So my concern here is we've got these phases. How immutable are these phases going to be? And I think that this is quite reassuring, because Tomo said the same in looking at what you've done about alpha APIs. Maybe that's true. I think what will inevitably happen is we'll do phase one and we'll get it wrong. There'll be things about it that we want to change later on, and So I'm very keen that we do something iterative where we come up with something, so we can show to people and say, what do you think of this, and find out the things that are wrong with it, and then go back and change it without locking ourselves into.
I agree on that. So maybe that's a fair point, and that's a fair point. I will add that so that where is the comment here? This is comment.
I mean, you can still say that you want to add in the following functionality. It doesn't say that the other functionalities is not changed, right?
Yeah, so long as we do it in a manner that means that we can change it. That's my
No,
so I'm quite happy to play ahead with the schedule, so long as we don't lock ourselves in. Which I think we're not. I'm just.
Yeah, so that is true. So and that's very point to kind of include that, and that's what I'm considering. So phases is to kind of moving forward. So I assume phase 2. This is where we can start thinking about beta of the. This is what I'm thinking. Like, where is it? Only after phase 3. So basically, beta is here for the API. So only phase 2 will be still beta. So this is where I'm thinking we should have more or less idea of what the final view of the API should look like. And only after we start integrating with some other features, this is where I can say, okay, this is V1 because it's already being used by something else. We have some experience around that one. So, okay, we can definitely say that this is V1, and we can say that the API that we discussed today should be fine. So that's kind of my idea. Thanks for that. I agree that, and by the way, the phases doesn't mean the phase will have, I'm not sure whether that's even possible. That's another thing, right? Because the phases, I think it's something new here in Kubernetes, this release process, where basically you would assume a specific cap being driven to alpha, beta, GA, where I'm seeing the specific separate phases driving this thing to GA. So maybe this has to be better organized in terms of how to fit this will fit into Kubernetes, because maybe we just have to reiterate on the same cap all the time. I'm not sure. So that's something that we have to think, because every cap has its own life cycle of alpha, beta, GA, where in my case I'm trying to kind of spread it across multiple caps. Tomo, you had a hand.
Yep. So they are maybe the how do I say? So the now I'm looking at the Kubernetes document, and then the maybe the API version is the B1, not the alpha beta. At that time, this should be the G8 in the Kubernetes functionality. So then maybe the how do I say? At the phase 3 is the still in middle of this stuff. So so that I'm a little bit wondering that we can say in the GA, I mean that as the version 1 API. So yes, this one. So this phase 3 implementation V1 API available. This means the GA, I think.
Yes, that's the GA. Yeah. So this is this is V1. This is the final version of what we think. Consider that the APIs is at, right?
But still now the phase 4 exists. So
this is additional features which will have their own probably life cycle, and this is truly 2 years away. So this probably has to be better. Probably next year.
Or maybe
detail about this one.
Yeah,
so,
or maybe
this
maybe
right?
change it, right? So based on the SIG networks, the decision, I think. So SIG network, what is the how do I say? The more upper community will decide the GA, I think.
For the phase 4 features, or what do you have in mind?
I mean that maybe we should discuss about the GA's the definition of this multi-network stuff. I mean.
So
I mean that. So the hot plug or this stuff is also in the use case requirement list. So they maybe someone may thinking that the all use case is covered, then we can saying the GA. So
that's what you mean. Okay. So
they maybe I'm a little bit wondering that the GA's definition is matched in this case. So maybe this is the should be discussed in the SIG network or some stuff. I mean that.
So this is so keep in mind, Tomo, this is for the API V1. I'm considering the API GA, right? I hear you. What you're saying is if
The
we don't
all
consider
multi-network functionality, but also they are
Right.
usually the
I see.
once the functionality is GA, then the API is also the B1. I think the stuff is.
I hear you because what your concern is we're gonna V1 the API where we didn't look into the how to plug in ability still, right? That's what you're concerned about. Okay, yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, let me.
Yeah, maybe at that time the B1 is not the B1 here. Maybe
right,
the beta 2 or other.
Yeah. I hear you.
My instinct about this is that we'll want to go to GA, but we'll want to not go to GA very quickly, just because this is a sufficiently niche set of use cases that we're going to have odd use cases that we missed or that require slight changes coming out or potentially very late. So I'd be very happy to go to alpha fairly quickly, go to beta at some stage fairly late, and then leave it in beta really for some considerable while.
No, that's definitely. I agree on that one. I just maybe this one is too fast, and I agree with you, Tomo. We should definitely push it out. Yeah, I will adjust that. That's a fair point. Okay, I don't want to go through the other things more in details. We already committed 25 minutes on this. I didn't want to do that. So please review this again, and if you think something is too aggressive, keep commenting on specific boxes and what's not. Any other general questions to this?
Yeah, one sort of. So today there are no APIs, right? So we're adding APIs. So we looked at sort of which other groups do we need? I mean, we know we need to work with the CNI team, right? And we also discussed with the cryo teams and so on. But I think we need to start identifying so which areas in Kubernetes will be impacted by this. So and I sort of own things that will have to change, but we cannot change. And I don't know which phase that should be part of, but
no, that's as we go. I assume that's a fair point. Right now, I'm thinking just as we go, we will see. I want to kind of define the API so that we know what's where and how it's going to behave in terms of CNI or any of those. So that's. Again, you mentioned that, and I'm trying to put back on any kind of alignment to any of those because I'm considering those implementation detail. It might be done in CNI. It doesn't have to be done in CNI. Fair. And from my point of view, CNI can catch up and support specific this API. But we need to look at the implementation, of course, to have some sort of it, but it doesn't have to be dependent on a specific CNI. If we can get, and we have Michael.
I'm not sure. It was more like identify the groups.
Right. No. But identify groups that would have to do something for this effort. Yeah. And I don't consider, like, for example, CNI as a blocker for that because
no.
That's what I'm getting at, right? Yes, I like the other thing would be we have to change the pod spec, right? And how that's going to behave, right? So I wonder whether we can still just do it or do we have to engage the, I'm not sure who's responsible, the core API folks, I'm not sure who's responsible and who's handling the pod spec, but definitely those guys would have to get engaged, right? Because we want to change the pod spec for pod spec generally to include the pod networks in it, right? So for that purpose, I definitely agree. We have to identify those teams and deal with them and kind of handle them and help get their help into kind of an agreement on that changes. But I agree with you. We need to identify those blocker teams that we have to work to get this API in. Okay. Any other questions to this? And one more note, I think this is what kind of initially why Michael proposed to do this, to kind of identify what should we focus on specific phases. And this is kind of came up last meeting where we start talking about some things which we said that's going to happen in later phases. So that's why I'm trying to as well to kind of point out what we are focusing in this quarters, to kind of the generic API and ability for it to be kind of referenced in the pod. So that's what we are focusing today. I know we want to kind of expand that, and whatever we define today, it's not final. It still just will be an alpha, as I mentioned. So as we go with all the other phases, we are going to evolve the API to kind of, okay, now we need this field because we need to support this feature. That's what I'm considering is going to happen in the future. But I want to kind of focus ourselves on those phases so that we don't get diverge around on the other directions, and we don't kind of to kind of focus ourselves on the target. And as we go along over the time, we're going to kind of tackle all the other problems that kind of come along. Hopefully that's it's clear. All right, so I'm going to go back to our any other. Let me see.
Can I ask one more thing? So
Yeah,
there's phasing there, and there's stuff about getting the spec right, and that obviously can be done in this meeting. There's also implementation. So
right.
one of the outputs of this has to be an implementation. A couple of questions on that. One is that intended to be a final implementation or a prototype or a proof of concept? What's the kind of quality bar there is? And do we have people lined up to actually write that code? Because clearly that can't just be done in a meeting.
So I am definitely signing up for that in my capacity that I'm going to be available. So definitely I am going to drive that, even implementation. So, and that's why I said it's a aggressive, even though I created it myself, but I consider this being an aggressive schedule. I'm not sure would I be able to do it in half a year, even, right? Because there's a lot, and I never did any of this, so that's for me will be quite a lot, quite new, a few things. I always appreciate if anyone wants to kind of chip in and help. That's that's as well helpful. But to kind of the bar should be, we should have a functioning CI in obviously in upstream Kubernetes. That's the bar. We cannot have API. We don't want to go to the stage, and probably everyone is going to push back on a case where we're just going to create API similar to like what network policies is today, where we don't have a full implementation on it in the code. So that's something that we don't want to just do. We have to have at least a reference implementation for this.
Yeah, and from my perspective, one of the reasons I'm asking that is there's a chance that I have some time myself to do some work on this, or that I can get someone else to work on this, or to put a little bit of effort in to help. But we'll just need to make sure that we get an ask that I can make to my management line to get some time.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. So right now the as I mentioned, right now by this semester we want to finalize the APIs, right, and definitions. And as we go along, we can start discussing here what can be our reference implementation. Probably next meeting we can try to look at that. What can be our reference kind of project in which we can do the reference implementation? I talked with Antonio. He said there is a CNI he has in kind. Which is in cluster in the code of Kubernetes, which we can just add to and try to build implementation in here to kind of implement all this API there. So that's something that we can definitely look at, and that will be like the first thing I will look at where to implement this. I think Perry had a hand.
Yeah, so it's partly a question to Shane, or a comment from Shane. So what I've seen in other projects, that once you have, it's very hard to start sharing and scale up when working just with at least for me, documents like this, to sort of start organizing using Git and having a way to come with suggested changes and merging and so on. It makes it much easier for more people to contribute. If we're going to start working on APIs, that is some sort of file or files that I think is easier to work with in a repo. I don't know what others think, but I think we need to go there at some point. Shane, do you have a comment on it, or?
No, I hear you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Doug.
Was there a question to me, Per? I'm not sure.
No, it's like or to everyone, sort of, when do you think we should sort of start going on more to a repo-based approach, and then sort of how to be able to contribute and comment on things? And
I think right now, as soon as we're gonna have some initial phases, kind of view of the APIs, right? I don't want to. I want to kind of establish on this, and I think two things: this part, and then the next part will be how would you reference that inside the pod? I think this is where the starting point can be. How basically the basics you have defined, and then start doing something inside the repository where you can change stuff, right? Based on that, I think this is where will be the.
That's what Per was basically saying, right? Am I missing something?
No, I prefer to work from a Git repo with sort of files that you can add and sort of remove easily, and
everybody can see it. It's a single point for everybody
What
to see
we are
what's
changing.
going on.
Yeah. That's but I don't think that the other thing is. Keep in mind, I'm not sure how that can be implemented. That's something that probably I will seek for your guidance on that part. Is won't that be most of these changes directly in the KK repository? That's one thing, right? So having, I think, Shane, you have and I'm gonna bring up Gateway API stuff. You have your own repository, so basically you can kind of
it's really nice to have.
That's really nice to have. I'm not sure whether we can have that here, right? I'm not sure. Maybe the APIs, can we?
Yeah.
Maybe. So because maybe, okay, but then you still have to change like the pod repository, pod spec. That has to happen in KK, right? Then the pod network API probably can be a separate thing if we want to consider this being a CRT initially, right? Though I would prefer having this as a part of the core, but. And this is where Shane, probably you can give us some experience because you
I know the appeal of wanting to have stuff in core, but I wouldn't do it now. In retrospect. Like the not being in core has a lot of benefits. In part of that is velocity.
Okay. But
and especially if all you're trying to do right now is, if I think I'm understanding what Per is suggesting, is basically just let's kind of move out of the KEP for where everything is, and let's have a playground, more or less, like a place where we can start to play with this. That makes so much sense to me. Actually, I'm doing something in Gateway API right now where I'm adding some prototyping. I'm actually prototyping the conformance profiles that we're working on. I won't go into depth about that, but there's a GEP on our site if you want to see what that is. And using like build tags to basically make it clear to people, hey, you don't actually use this unless you know you want to use this. So there's some simple things that you can do to make sure that everybody has a central repository, but you're not like you're being really clear about the fact that you're prototyping and that it's not something that's going to be stable or potentially even continue to exist. And that can be really helpful for some people. I personally like that. I think that writing the KEP, or in a lot of cases for me, it's like writing a GEP, but then going and kind of building something that feeds back into the KEP. Like it's the prototyping is part of the development is it's really helpful.
+1.
All right. Any other comments on this? I put that down in the meeting notes. Something to consider. Probably we can start thinking about like kicking off even a new repository. So that's something that I would start looking into. And I assume there are no voices around. I think we are all agreeing to kind of kick off this. I think it's something that we need to point out. Let me just state it here. This will be a CRD. Any objection to this?
Will it be a CRD really? The CRD is well, I mean, if you're in Kubernetes, you're not a customer.
No, this is what we are saying. I don't think that that's the only way you can have a separate repository. around this pod network object,
Yeah, then
you
you
would
can
have to be a
change it in there.
CRD.
Okay.
We can maybe merge it later on to core,
Yeah,
but that's what Shane was saying as well, right? Because that's the consequence.
So-
It gives more
So-
flexibility, that's for sure.
So just to be clear, the new resource, we're going to make it a custom resource to start with, and then
Yeah,
make it a
exactly.
core Kubernetes
Yeah.
resource later.
Yeah,
And
right.
I'm fine with that as a if
Yeah,
it
same
will
here.
speed things up. I don't have the
So
kind of
the-
hands-on experience to know what the impact is, but it sounds.
So okay, let me figure it out. What is the impact? What is the impact of this, and is it possible to transition?
Yeah, the bit that I'm not sure I understand in this proposal is, okay, so the pod network can be a custom resource, but what about when we start changing the pod spec to reference
Exactly.
it? Is that,
So
does that
this
not
is-
require us at that point to change over?
Yeah, I think I'm also agree with me with that.
Yeah,
So I mean that maybe initially this will be the CRD, but at some point we should move the CRD as the real native object.
But then we use annotations from the beginning, and then when it's ready to move, you change the annotations
No,
to.
please, no.
No, it's not
we already have annotation. That's the point of this whole thing.
I agree,
So-
but as when you use CRDs, you cannot have. You
Then
cannot
that will
refer
be a
to the
problem.
CRD, right?
So unfortunately, then we will have to go to KK straight away. Unfortunately, then that will be.
Yeah.
We will have to move to Kubernetes right away, and that will be the consequence. So I will validate with. And someone here can kind of speak up to this, but if not, I probably can ping Antonio or some folks from my side to kind of what will be the consequences of this.
Yeah, so my concern about this is that in some ways, Multis is absolutely fine in terms of what it does. The areas where it's shaky are the areas where the scheduler and
Exactly.
and so on need to have a really deep understanding, and where the
Mhm.
container runtime needs to do something special that requires knowledge of networks and things like that. And we can't do that with CRDs. So we could maybe do some use CRDs and annotations to figure out the early stuff and play around and have a playground,
Yeah.
but it has to move into some Kubernetes,
I think
proper
even the
fork of
alpha-
Kubernetes as soon as
I
we've
think
got
the
past
alpha-
phase one.
Yeah, I think the alpha will have to be in Kubernetes as well, at least from the get-go, right? So POCs, probably we can have something, but then in terms of repository, then we can just create something common for our group temporarily, or we can just kick off something for our own personal stuff.
I mean, so I think we agree. When it goes to alpha in Kubernetes, it cannot be a CRD. But when playing around with before going there, I mean, we can use CRDs.
That's true, yes. I agree.
So
but then
maybe
but that goes down to my, because you initially started discussion around like having a common place where we can do that, right? So
No, it's like I want to be able to, or sort of, so.
What I'm getting at, we cannot have then something officially coming from Kubernetes to have something like that. Like Gateway API has a centralized place, a fully fledged repository where they develop and have official PRs and all the issues. And we then cannot have that. We have to work off of KK. Anything else that will be just temporary, that everyone can we can create, someone of us can just create their own personal repository and then share it with everyone, so we can just play around for the time being. But eventually, the core of the things will be in the Kubernetes repository. That's what I'm trying to get. The central point of this whole discussion that you were thinking of having will have to happen in KK. That's what I'm trying to get to. There was some other voice I interrupted. Sorry.
I think maybe this could be as the implementation or design discussion point of view. We should have the phased approach. I mean that the first phase we should create the CRD file, and then we do a discussion. At that time, this CRD file is directly introduced in the real running the Kubernetes cluster, so that everyone can testing. Not the perfectly, of course, but the sum of the testing these API is the feasible or not. And then after that, this is just the prototyping of the pretty first phase of the prototyping. But even though using these CRD in the GitHub it's pretty good to managing the issue or some of the change tracking. I mean that the contributor can filing any issues and then also the filing any pull request to improve in these stuff. And then this is the good. And then I mean that maybe the Google Doc can managing by the comment, but to the of course the copy paste to the GitHub the running cluster is the awkward anyway. So the I suppose and then after the some certain I mean that the once we implementing the core Kubernetes, I mean that the at least at the phase 1 we need to have a CI or some reference implementation. At that time we should port to this CRD to the real Kubernetes stuff.
So Tomo, that will be conditions under, can we then reference such CRD in the pod? If we, and in a spec, I'm talking about directly in the spec.
Yeah.
If that will be a blocker and basically the folks from the pod spec will tell us, no, you cannot just reference some CRD, then we will not do that. Even for the phase 1, we have to, that's the main, the definition of phase 1 is to have an API and be able to reference it in a pod spec.
Yeah.
If we cannot have that, then
yeah. So at that time, at the end of the phase 1, this object should be in the native K/K. But before that, I mean that now, I mean that the before starting the prototype implementations, this having the CRD is the pretty good to understanding everyone, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So that's something that temporarily so have something temporarily.
Yeah, and also the design this cap the Google Doc is to submitting the pull request. At that time we do not mention this will be a CRD at that time because the when we implementing this pod network, this should be the native object, not a CRD.
Yeah. No, that's okay. Yeah, I think let me investigate on this one more, and then probably the statement will have to go away, or I will give you more clarification. Yep.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. So from our last meeting, I think we kind of stopped on the provider field. What I did here is I updated the whole doc with the pod network naming. So now I think I got all the spots where it was a network, not a pod network. So I got those spots. A bit more clarification on the IPAM, just to kind of the two pieces that we have, the IPAM, the external and Kubernetes. So I expanded the definitions over here. And because of that, I had a comment to what it will mean when specific IPAM option is not specified. And this is what I added here. So when it's not specified, that means we do not expect IP on a specific interface from this pod network. So that's what it means. So we have basically 3 options of how this can be configured. You can specify external, and which means you use something outside of, use non-built-in mechanism to configure the IP, but you have to configure an IP on the interface. You can use Kubernetes, which will configure the IP, but using built-in mechanisms like the KCM's IPAM controller and maybe cluster cider, something that we have to discuss how the internal will be do, because we need to cover that in this cap as well. And then last option will be when you don't specify it, that means that you do not expect any IP on this interface. Yes, Tom?
So the minor questions, but is there any reason why you do not mention the IPv4, IPv6 for each description, IPAM4 and IPAM6?
What do you mean?
So currently the IPAM4 defines what is handling. So how do I say? Based on this stuff, implicitly IPAM4 seems to be for IP version 4, and IPAM6 is for IP version 6. But
that's correct, yes.
This doesn't express the explained explicitly. So I mean that you should mention that the IPAM4 is for IPv4 and the IPAM6 is for IPv6.
Oh. Okay. I see what you're saying. Defines what handling. Oh, yeah, I see what you say. Yeah, let me just okay, yeah. Yeah, that's a good catch. We'll add that. Any other comments on this? I think this is now clear on what this does and what it means. Neha?
Yeah. So if the IPAM type is Kubernetes, how does it differentiate from the regular IPAM which CNI uses for allocating an IP to a pod? Both the pods are using the same IPAM to allocate two different IPs.
No, so that's what I'm saying. This will be expanded. Today, yes, today it uses just the default one. That's where I'm hoping this cap will change and allow us to configure IPAM per pod network.
Got it.
Right?
Are there any discussions happening on this as well?
Will be, yes, as we will get there. Now,
okay.
If you look at, you can look at in my, I think there is a link in the minutes. You look at the top. There are. Is there a link? I think I removed the older link, but down the line, if you look at bottom of the doc, there are links to. Let me maybe bring this up. There was maybe because you joined just recently. There was an initial draft of this doc, which has much more ideas, and I will try to kind of link that on the top. This is an old doc that we because now we switch to a new doc to kind of get a clear view of this whole thing. But I will put the link to the old doc in the top of the document so that you can read it again. And this is where I kind of had some ideas on what can it be done, and yeah, we will get there.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's my idea. That's my so being able to define pod network and being able to reference in the pod, but this comes with IPAM as well. So I consider IPAM part of this cap because it has to be there defined, right, as the default behavior for the interfaces.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. If you're extending the internal one,
yeah,
then
I want to do that. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Parameters. I'm naming it full name. I had this this next field was params ref. I'm just calling it fully parameters ref. Just renaming it. If someone has opinions on this one, let me know in the comments. All right, and we getting back to the provider. I think from our last week's discussion, we have 10 minutes, so hopefully we can push on. The concern was it can be abused. This is definitely what I want to do. So the provider, to give you some more context, what I'm thinking the provider can be, and maybe we should just get rid of it if that doesn't works with us, is definition of who is implementing this network. Basically saying I can have 5 implementers of pod networking in my cluster. If they are interoperable, so basically I can have multiple and they all don't bite each other, and then basically they can coexist in a single cluster. I want to have ability to identify, okay, this pod network is going to be handled by the full provider. This pod network is going to be delivered or provided by the bar provider. Do you see that, or is that clearer? Or and should we just not allow this? Because what I'm trying to here give the ability of kind of that provisioning, similar to, if you think of a ingress or gateway. I'm not sure gateway has their own classes. They do that for classes, but in ingress it has a provider as well. Basically, you have ingress object, which basically can be implemented by various provider, Istio, Nginx, or any other, right? So basically, depending who's implementing the specific ingress object, that's how the provider differentiated. Now, you had a hand, you want to say something?
Oh, sorry, that was one previous.
Oh, okay. Tomo?
Almost the things is agree that, but the one question is about the what does it mean is the provider is empty.
Oh,
So
so
this
yeah.
this is now is the optional. So
I will. So this is to if so this is up to the implementation, right? Because implementation can do this. Implementation can say, I will handle only the ones with the provider X or my name in the provider, or I will handle all that are empty. There is no provider, so I handle them all. And then if there is other implementation doing the same, then you are not you're not compatible with each other. But it will be up to the implementation of whether, okay, do I handle empty ones and my name, or do I handle only my name? I think that's what it would mean.
So this field is only concerned by the non-core Kubernetes component. I mean that the KCM or Kubelet do not care about this field.
No, those completely, because this is all about the downside, right? So who's implementing yes, that's correct. This is only for the implementer to worry about this, right?
So should we add the omit empty in this JSON notation?
Oh yeah, sorry, missing, yes. Any other questions on the provider? Cap, you had a question. Does that? I think last week last meeting someone had a concern that then someone can abuse this and say, oh, I want to use. They will reuse this as a indicator of. Like, for example, oh, I want to use MacVLAN here. That's my provider. And then they will consider not the vendor, but just the implementation as a provider, right? So it can be, this field can be abused.
Well, but another concern is about the, this, how do I say? This cap allows the users to launching the one or more provider. I mean that, okay, let's imagine the, okay, the Maltus will provide the provider. Okay, at that time, the Maltus provider. And then maybe in addition, some, I don't know, maybe AWS. The AWS is also provide the provider.
Yes.
So sometimes the user creating their cluster in the AWS, and then they running the Maltus provider as well as the AWS provider, and then based on this provider field, the each Maltus provider watching this provider field, and then if this provider.
Exactly that, yes. That's the exact example. Thank you, Tomo. But exactly for that purpose, yes. That's what this field is for. Because otherwise, if we don't have this field, the only other way to differentiate between that would be through the parameters reference. But what if a implementation doesn't have one? What then, right? So basically, if there is no parameters reference kind of introduced by the implementation, how they would differentiate between, do I handle this or not? Right.
So this is just the kind of the feelings, but I'm thinking we are likely to writing some architecture section or some similar section which describes in this proposal which component will be introduced. I mean that not introduced, but in the Kubernetes, but this expect to some provider, and then the provider may coexist, not only the one, also the several provider may exist in the one cluster or some. Otherwise, sometimes the reader may getting confused, because so currently the Kubernetes assumes the one provider because the single interface. So sometimes they may have such assumption and then reading, even though that this describe the multi-interface. At that time, that they're still thinking that the one provider is only allowed. So maybe we should describe the some, I don't know, architecture or some stuff in some section in this CAP.
Around which part, how the providers would work? Is that what you're referring to what we just described?
I certainly think this is a little bit subtle, and having it written out in more detail with a few examples would be very beneficial.
Yeah, I will do that.
Yeah, maybe the example is makes sense, I think.
Maybe I will ask differently. Is it something that we should have it in an alpha version of this? Should we just not have it? Don't complicate things. Keep it simple.
We probably shouldn't have it until there's an actual customer need or, you know, benefit to having it.
There is that. So anyone, because that's maybe unnecessary complication, which basically this is just a field. It will be only complication of, because we have to kind of additionally explain it, but in terms of implementation, it's just a field for the implementers, not for it will be only for the implementer, as Tomo kind of pointed it out. It will not be the core that we plan to change will not touch on this at all, right? It won't react on this field. So this is just a field, but explaining it took us like 20 minutes to explain it. So,
and then also this provider is related to params ref, right? So the params ref comment is the vendor or implementation. Maybe we should mention that the how do I say, params ref of the provider's object or some.
Yeah, that's true. But any other voices on what Michael mentioned and suggested? Opinions on
what is the alternative if you have more than one provider? How do you difference between them?
No, this is the only way. This would have to be. But the question is, do we have to tackle it right now, or can we postpone it to, let's say, someone will come back and say, oh, I want to have those two providers in my clusters and I want to support it. That will be, we have to create a CAP and expand the object and all that, the whole process. But we don't have to tackle it right now. That will be the because there is no other way, Lars. If we don't provide it, there is no way to differentiate.
You cannot have a defined label.
You could probably go with that, but that's, yeah, that will be, but it will be a poor man's, right? It's always an annotation or something, right?
No, annotation is no good. You have to be able to filter on it, and you have to be able to watch only your object. And that must be a very special field, because you cannot do that in like any field in an object.
Right.
So that has to be considered. And you get that for free if you have a label.
Yeah, or this field, right? So I think let's keep it. I think it might be cheap. I will add the description of what it means. I know functionality wise, it's not something that we gain much here, but I think we are not opening this object to now kind of, I want to put labels and now that's how I want to differentiate. So let's try to avoid that and let's have this field. I don't think it's too much of a cost. All right. I think we're gonna move on. I already take the liberty to cross out the routes. This is something that we can decide, or I think what you said here, and I think this is kind of implicates what type of network it is. If you have routes, so I agree this should not be part of this object, and I'm cutting this out. This should be part of your implementation details. Parameters ref, inside parameters ref, if you want to kind of provide some additional stuff here. Any comments on this? Nope. I think everyone's agreeing on that. And just gonna mention it, but I don't want to discuss the